Okay. All right, everybody, welcome. I'm Dave Schrock, one of the advisors here at the College of Arts and Sciences and Education here at Ferris State. I also, as you can see, teach our seminar course. It's our first year experience course, FSUS 100. And I've been asked by my good friend, Karen Royster James, head of the Academic Literacy Center, to give my presentation yet again this year, and this time including an online component. So again, learning online or in person, study skills and strategies. As you can kind of tell in terms of the topics I'm going to go over today, the learning science aspect, I'm a total nerd and I have researched this quite a bit. Same idea with how do you put that learning science into practice? How do you actually study? And then the last one, which we'll get to, is motivation and accountability, because it's hard work, this college thing. And we'll look into how to kind of keep yourself motivated during these times. And interspersed with all of this, again, is learning how to do this online in an effective way. First off, to start, got to be real. These are tough times. And during a pandemic, we are all kind of scattered. I think every faculty, staff, even anybody outside the academic world says this is tough. Giving an example, this morning, I've had the joy of discovering that my little remote clicker that it was my favorite has died. That thing's totally dead. And so there's that. And we had some staffing issues in terms of helping people with the Zoom, all sorts of fun stuff. Co-hosting was tough to make that happen on Zoom. Nobody is running at 10/10. So if you're kind of expecting that from yourself, a little self-compassion. You want to do it well, and it's important to do well in school. But hey, we are all kind of in this odd, strange, difficult environment that is trying to kind of function during a pandemic. So anyway, keeping it real, but we're still going to go for why this is important. And that's a great place to start. You kind of think of just school when it comes to learning science and studying and learning things. This is actually your whole life though, but we'll start with school. How about that? Just a taste of some of the things we're going to cover from the Journal of Psychological Science. They studied a group of people saying, hey, you could reread your textbook after a week, or you could quiz yourself over the material and look at the results. You're remembering almost twice as much if you quiz yourself over the material versus rereading it. And this is kind of one of those where everybody wins. It's actually quicker to quiz yourself too. Rereading takes a long time, and it turns out, based on some psychological science there, that it is a waste of time. We're gonna go over a lot more specific tips like that, because some people, hey, I didn't know how to study when I started in college. So this is a great example of how this can save you time and can certainly an effort, and you can get better grades. In terms of work, yeah, actually, my guest joining me today, Allison, working in the Academic Literacy Center, going into the work world soon. And she probably knows, as a lot of you do, you don't have to look too hard to find articles that say this shift to working at home might continue for a lot of jobs. So a lot of this that you're learning to kind of figure out right now, college is a great opportunity to kind of, train yourself as a professional. And this is yet another way in terms of making this work, working online, that is. The other thing, I think this is fun, if you go to yourmoneypage.com, you can type in your age and about when you want to retire. I calculated this for your average freshman starting off, basically last semester. Once you graduate, you have that many working days until retirement, quite a few. That does not count weekends, but that's quite a few days. So you're going to be learning and figuring out how to function effectively online for a lot of your work world. You spend a lot of your life at work, so that's definitely important as well. Lastly, there's my little nephew. In terms of life, that is my nephew Percy. He's now almost about 2. This is kind of an old picture, but he was a little one and hanging out with me. I love that he stuck his tongue out for me while he was posing for my photo. So we get along. But you think of a lot of different things in life. Learning how to do things, that is something you might do. For example, his parents were recommended this book by my friend Justin, who is a clinical psychologist at Ohio State. He's big into acceptance and commitment therapy. He's found very good success as opposed to like cognitive behavioral and some other ones. He specifically likes that and has suggested that book. So that's something my sister and brother-in-law are reading over. I just talked to my sister on the phone the other day. She said, well, it's going fine. With Percy, we're having to institute some boundaries now. So again, it's always this kind of life is asking you to adapt, to change, and kind of figure things out. That's the same in parenting. or caring for a little one. And then I kind of go to almost end of life stuff. Living in a nursing facility, assisted care facility. I just talked last week to my 94-year-old grandmother. She stopped. She said, "Did you know I'm 94?" I said, "I did." Was it much different than 93? She said, "Not really." But great talking with her. But my grandmother at one point said, "Getting older is an education." And I knew exactly what she meant. You don't stop learning and having to figure things out in terms of estate planning, in terms of taxes, in terms of all sorts of things that are going on. And honestly, you think about this, please call your relatives that are in assisted care facilities. They're especially dealing with loneliness, right? And so trying to navigate that in life, there are all sorts of strategies, and trying to sort through all of it and learn it is going to pay off. So it's great that those of you who are listening are in college or have been or whatever. It's great that you're here. And so let's make sure we can do this effectively, because it affects all those aspects, both work and life in school, right? So digging into the learning science, how does the brain learn? And I'll start with one of my very favorite books. Again, as I'm an advisor, I'm also a nerd, and I figure I should know a lot about how the brain works. And so I read this book, Make It Stick, and it's written by a couple of cognitive psychologists and a writer, a novelist, just to make it a little less boring. And it is fantastic. It is basically the Bible in terms of how does the brain learn? How does it learn best? And I put a link up there to Flight. If you go to Smart Search, we have this online. It's available fully online. So if you were wondering, I need to have some more, I need some study skills. I'll give you some of these here, but that's a great place to go afterward to look into it. This book is fantastic. And I might mention, highly endorsed by that student in the corner there, excellent student, Mary. Mary is one of my former students. She is currently studying neuroscience at the University of Michigan. And she is a fantastic student. I've graded her work, I can tell you that. And she is doing really well at the University of Michigan. And she said, "Dave, this is a fantastic book. This is exactly how we've learned in cognitive psychology how the brain works." But she said this pays off in my grades and in my classes. So highly endorsed by Mary. Can't get more much better than that. My other advisees have appreciated these techniques too. So we'll talk about these different aspects of learning science. One, desirable difficulties. And we don't want to go too difficult at the point we give up and get frustrated, but what the brain needs is it needs to work. If it's going to learn, it is very much, I love that little graphic, by the way. It is very much like muscles. We have to work them a little bit to actually have them grow and function effectively. For example, if we study things in the same order, our brain can get pretty lazy with that, and we're not really exerting much effort. If we study it, even just mixing it up, I know when I took a class from my philosopher friend recently, that's exactly how I'd study. I'd study the concepts in different order. Your brain has to work a little bit more. That's probably how you're going to see it on the test anyway. So that's what we mean by desirable difficulties. Rereading the textbook, we covered that one with that first research finding. You can do that easily, and your brain gets kind of lazy. If you have to stop and summarize, though, all of a sudden your brain has to do some work, and you have to figure out what is important, what is not, what does this mean? You're going to remember it better. We'll talk about specifically why. Really cool. This is a big one in terms of online. Is it easy? And do we like to prefer to just kind of shut off the camera and just kind of watch lecture on Zoom? You can, but that's pretty passive. If you got the camera on, if you're taking notes, you have to stop and figure out what is important. You're going to have a much greater chance of learning that and remembering that material. So that's what we mean by desirable difficulties. And I'll give more specific examples as we go on. Retrieval, as you can see there, Hebb's rule, psychologists that basically figured this out, those neurons in our brain, when they fire together, they literally wire together. And we think of that as just kind of like, right, we see these like weird solar effects going on here. No, that's literally electrical impulses in our brain forming pathways with dendrites when we retrieve information. So again, when we access it, like we quiz ourselves, it's literally forming that. I'll show you, it's pretty cool. So involving the retrieval is also doing this, the repetition. That is Hermann Ebbinghaus, psychologist forever ago, actually in 1885. He was at the very early stages saying, how do we learn? How does the brain learn? We're just trying to figure this out, because obviously learning efficiently is important. And he came up with this. It's called the curve of forgetting. As you can see, at the time where we learn something, we haven't forgotten much at all, but then we go an hour later and oh boy, we've already forgotten over half of it, and obviously it goes down. What he figured out long ago, very rudimentary, but still true, that what you need to do is work in some reviews. if you review it, and again, ideally in the ways I mentioned, different order, access the information in a different way, you start doing that and look at the trajectory. Instead of just doing it once, you might remember a quarter of it, maybe. Obviously, these are just averages. You do 4 reviews, you might retain 90%. So this is really seminal, old, like this is not how you feel or how you personally take in information. This is true. Repetition is absolutely necessary for how you learn. And that was discovered long ago when we couldn't look at the brain. Now we can look at the brain, and it is so cool. What this is this is a super zoomed in picture of a little dendrite. So what connects those neurons in your brain? This is actually a picture of a dendrite growing. As we learn new information and we keep accessing it, those dendrites actually grow. If we stop accessing it, go backwards, it basically, that material is reabsorbed by the brain. The brain says, hey, we haven't used this in a while. We got to do other stuff. We're going to conserve energy. I imagine that's the sound it makes in my brain. But anyway, it shrinks, right? But you got to keep using it and accessing it in different ways. I'll have examples of this, but that's cool. That's what the little dendrites look like in our brain. Anyway, the other things you can do is connect it to what you already know. Harder for some subjects, but honestly, when you're creative, you can do this for almost any subject. I was talking to my friend, Dr. Felix Smith, one of our psychologists, fun guy to talk to, if just for the accent. I mean, English accent's the best. Anyway, Felix is a good guy, and I was talking to him one day, and he said, you know, when you're trying to study, if you already have something that you know, one of his students said, I am into Pokemon. He said, you already have in your brain this brilliant structure, keeping track of the characters and all their different characteristics and behaviors in different environments. You can attach all sorts of meaning to that. And it's easier because that structure in your brain's already built. So if you connect like a person in history or some sort of concept or something like that to Pikachu, or I don't know, it sounds odd, but honestly, a lot of times the weirder connections you can come up with, the better you're going to remember it. And so sometimes associating with that is great. For me, I might go a little bit more literally. I love SpongeBob, and if I'm taking marine biology, we're probably going to talk about plankton. I know how plankton's like on the show, and Patrick Starr. Maybe not the squirrel. I don't think you'll study squirrels, but you can really make some interesting connections there. So the things that you already know, think of hobbies. I mean, you can remember the stuff and keep track of it, and then just attach those other meanings to that. Multisensory learning. Now, this is an interesting one. I actually didn't know. Prior to becoming an advisor, prior to looking into this research a little bit more. The general takeaway is the more senses we can involve in learning, the better. Long ago, well, it may be that long ago, but I, probably before being an advisor, thought auditory learners, we have that, we have visual learners, we have kinesthetic learners. Sort of. Turns out we're actually all of those things. We may declare preferences in terms of, yes, we think we remember things better if we hear them or see them or do them. But a lot of the research, it's interesting. They said, well, we may have slight preferences, but when we actually put it in practice, we don't tend to do what we prefer. So we don't actually follow through on what we think we prefer. And even if we do, it's not as good as involving as many senses as we can. We'll talk about examples of this, but that's one that kind of shocked me. It's just saying, look, it's not just one way. Try to do it involve as many different senses as you can. American Psychological Association found that finding, and we'll talk about what that means. So when it gets to methods, how do we actually do this? Yes, we need to be the nerd. Nerds go off and do good things in this world. Means we know something to a great depth, right? And so I actually decided to crowdsource. Maybe I shouldn't call my friends nerds, but I did crowdsource on Facebook. I asked a lot of my colleagues who are professionals, my former students, advisees who are professionals and really successful. I'll tell you about all of them. And so I'm kind of including some of their feedback along with the really solid research findings that we know. So what do we mean by desirable difficulties? Well, my friend Nick, former advisee, who's doing some school social work activities in the area, I think of Morley Stanwood, I believe. So he said, and all this used with permission, by the way, Nick is cool with that. But Nick said, teaching others the material always helps me. Again, it's easy to reread. It's easy to just kind of look over your notes. But if you have to stop, if I had to explain something to Allison right now that she wasn't familiar with, but I was, that's forcing me to think about something a way that she's going to understand it. that is a little bit difficult, right? I have to stop and modify what I'm saying, explain the concept a little bit differently, and also kind of flips it. Now I'm all of a sudden kind of the teacher. Great desirable difficulty, and Nick is spot on in terms of that. My next example seems odd, but hey, I'm an odd fellow. I enjoy cooking. It's kind of the lesson here. That dish I recently made this weekend. That is Ibin burning noodles. It is a Chinese dish, Sichuan province dish. Turned out very well first time around, which is awesome. That doesn't always happen. With this, I can easily demonstrate desirable difficulties. So when I made this, the first thing that I did is I watched the YouTube video. What is it, Chinese Cooking Demystified or something? It's a really cool channel. So this guy explains how to do it. Now, the first thing I did, very similar to maybe how some people go to class. They'll watch the Zoom video and they'll just kind of take it in, very passive. I did watch it the first time. If you asked me after that, how do you make it? What ingredients are in here? What are some techniques? I mean, I'd remember noodles. I would remember that it was Chinese. Maybe a few ingredients, because it's Szechuan, I probably would remember the peppercorns, because that's kind of a trademark thing there. Other than that, that's about all I got. But that's not very difficult. That's just me watching a YouTube video. I'm passively taking it in. But when it came to making it, this guy does everything in metric. I just have like tablespoons and teaspoons. And so I don't have a lot of metric measuring tools. And so I had to do conversions. So I had to convert all the ingredients and type out the results. So again, I'm working with the material in different ways there. I had to write down a little bit of the technique, just so I got it right, because there's timing is specific here. And then later, I think and then I made it. And then my roommate, I mean, he generally trusts me, but he's also like, what is in this? And so explaining what's in it to him, I did the obligatory post on Facebook. Look what I made, everybody, friends and whoever cares. And so I posted this, and one of my friends, former professor of mine actually, Nancy, said, that sounds fantastic, but I can't do spice. Could you make this less spicy and still have it be good? And I had to think about it. Well, you could remove this, maybe you could sub this, maybe whatever. Again, I'm thinking about the recipe in a deep way. Now, after all of those desirable difficulties, me telling it to my roommate and explaining that, thinking about how I could modify it for my friend Nancy, who doesn't like spice, like she can't even do green pepper. I'm like, wow. And then, and also thinking about like how to convert it, I can tell you almost everything about this dish, every single ingredient, almost every single amount. And I know it because, again, that's what we mean by kind of immersing yourself in it. And that's what you can do with your classes as well. You just work with the material in different ways, and that's how that works. Retrieval. Megan is a she does some kind of conservation education in the Lansing area, which is really cool, former student of mine. So Megan says she loves flashcards. Aha, they're great. You can do those online with Quizlet. That's one way to do it. I kind of dig the old-fashioned just writing it. We tend to remember things even better. But some other examples of retrieval. So not only flashcards, she said, going back and highlighting my notes. So again, you're having to stop and think about what's important, and you're kind of retrieving that info. And then she's saying that helped her organize your thoughts. So again, flashcards are a great way to do the retrieval. And like we talked about, different order, mix those things up. Don't do them in the same order. That'll be even better. Nicole, one of my former students who is now in the Masters of Social Work program here at Ferris. She's going to be amazing. So good people. She said, for me, it helps to study with a friend or roommate and be quizzed. Perfect. Even if they don't know the information, I would say that's even better. It's fun when they ask questions because you have some info to teach them, and then you're repeating what you've learned. And then she went on to say jokes and hilarity ensue because blah, blah, blah. If you have friends that are in the same classes or even not, man, that's a good accountability partner. You know friends that are going toward the same goal as you, which is to achieve so that you're employable, that you're a lifelong learner and you can adapt. Hook up with those friends, right? And quiz yourself, teach each other. You're doing the retrieval as you kind of teach those other people as well. So some great tips for retrieval. For repetition, my former student Sierra, who's so cool, she studied chemistry here and she now works in a lab and does all sorts of research, which is really cool. Stuff that I don't understand because math was a little harder for me than it was for Sierra, but that's all right. So she said the majority of her classes were STEM, so science, technology, education, that type of stuff, so math. So different strategies, flashcards, she said, and outlines. So she would also do outlines. The trick is, she said, she would try to be the professor and try to make flashcards of the question. So you're kind of doing some perspective taking, which again takes some difficult work there. Had to digest the material. That's the key. Making outlines, had to rewrite my notes, but I would add additional clarifying info from Google in the textbook. That's a great technique some of my other advisees have used, saying, hey, if the professor explains it in one way, I can go on Google and find another way that you can explain it. You're looking at the same topic from different angles, you're more likely to remember it. And like she said at the end there, the idea was to really have to work with the info. Now, kind of bad news, because work is work, nobody likes work. But again, I would argue the whole time and effort investment in college is definitely worth it. It has been for me, for sure. So repetition, big. And the way you can do that is you can plan it out. We'll get to planning a little bit later, but let's say I've got an exam on that Friday. Well, I can back time all the activities where I'm going to get that repetition, where I'm having a study session with my friend, maybe teaching it to them, where I'm going to go over my notes in a different order and not just read them over, but I'll cover up the definition and try to remember what the heck the professor was talking about. I'm going to work in that repetition and kind of go backwards throughout the weeks preceding, just to make sure I get it. You've heard cramming. That's why it doesn't work, because there's not enough repetition there. You're really only using short-term memory. It can only hold so much. So you're making it really tough on your brain. And like we talked about physically before, those pathways are not even being formed. Right? So if you do the repetition, those cool little dendrites will actually, like, your brain is literally changing, which is cool. And you'll get that repetition, but you can definitely use your planner to help you with that. Connecting to what you know. This is a great example from one of my current cool advisees. We met this week. She's good people. And so she said, Heidi said, you know, when I would study anatomy physiology, this is one example she thinks of. This specific muscle, the gracilis muscle. And she said one way that she remembers it, because she said she didn't do ballet, but her friends did. And she said, I remembered this because people who do ballet would definitely want to stretch this muscle. And I mean, that's not I thought a mouse ballerina would be more interesting than that. But you think of a ballerina, they're graceful. Right? I mean, the good ones I think are. And so she said, gracilis, grace, that's how I'm going to remember that. Is that a weird connection? Sure. Are you going to remember it though? Absolutely. I might even like have the little mouse there, because why not? I'll remember the little mouse and how graceful I would imagine the little mouse would do a little pirouette or whatever ballet people do. Not like me. I don't know what that is, but that would be a great way to remember it. One that I think is one that I've used before. If you can't read that, it's looking at a set of muscles that are kind of on a rib cage there, but yeah, I wanted you to mostly see the shape. That's called the serratus anterior. And again, kind of going with anatomy physiology, but also looking at my cooking expertise in like serratus. I'm also looking at the way in which those muscles are shaped. Immediately my brain went to serrated knife. Turns out they're the same root word, means to cut. But you look at the shapes, that is exactly how I would remember it. And is that weird? Yes. But again, you're making all sorts of these connections and you're building upon things that you already know, much more likely to remember it. Multisensory, there's a lot of different tips here. My friend, Dr. Zoe Wendler, she is saying that she reads the material out loud, mostly because she's saying, hey, I read really fast. So doing it out loud gets the auditory thing going, and you're hearing it as well, and you're visually looking at it. And she's saying, hey, it really forces me to slow down and really internalize the important stuff. That's a great tip. Next one. Yeah, this one's long. I have to, that's why I gave it a ha-ha as a reaction, because, oh, good grief, Logan. You were so thorough. Logan was a pharmacy student here, and excellent student, cool person. Here's what she said she would do to study. So highlighters is what she loved to do, color coding. And I don't know if she actually did hearts, but we'll go with that. In my mind, she did. We'll go with the, hey, this is going to be on the exam, so kind of red. Blue, light blue, some key points, yellow, kind of some supplemental info, looks like a purple to me, some drug names, and can be modified for other majors, haha, for sure. Then some orange, kind of learning objectives. And then she'd say like a pen or highlighter, she would use green or red. And that last part there, I love where she's saying the red, it's on the final, important enough to be there, I need to know it in practice. That sounds super elaborate, but I've had multiple students say that they've used kind of the color coding aspect. Logan, I am so proud. She posted the other day, she's actually a hospital pharmacist. She works at, I believe, Mott, University of Michigan Hospital. She literally said the other week, she made a life-saving like notice something. Somebody, I believe it was a child, was scheduled to get maybe 100 or maybe 1,000 times too much of whatever this was, and she caught it. So even if your major isn't necessarily pharmacy, I always tell especially my social work people or anybody that works with people, these future people you're working with, they are counting on you to be an expert. They don't want mediocre. They don't want so-so. They want a really, really good expert. So your job in college is to maybe work that hard, right? I would say it definitely is. And that's a great example of how Logan did it in terms of working with some different senses, making that visually pleasing to you. Another aspect in terms of multisensory learning, this is a research finding from Scientific American that they published. Taking notes by hand, you're more likely to remember them. You can take notes on your laptop, but basically what they described is you're more likely to do what they call transcribing. If you can type faster than you can write, and most people can, I mean, hunt and pack people, maybe not, but generally, if you can type faster than you can write, you don't have to do much thinking because you can type out pretty much everything the professor is going to say. Because you have to go more slowly with writing, it engages the brain. It's that desirable difficulty again. We have to slow down and think about what is important, what connects to what. I also like it because you can draw connections, you can draw graphs, you can draw the mouse ballerina or whatever you want to do. But knowing that you write notes, that definitely engages some other senses, which is great. The other aspect that comes into online learning, you maybe have seen this. I would say it depends on the class. Taught a few online ones. It just depends on the class. But you know, if you see a Zoom class where there are very few people kind of tuning in and they have camera off, first, because again, I got to be real as an advisor. I work with students in all sorts of different situations. If you've got a distracting environment, or you're going to be bugging somebody else, or you just can't have the camera on, understood. Try as much as you can, and we'll talk about ways to do this. Try as much as you can, though, to be in an environment where you can have that camera on. I think of this as more of a self-discipline thing. You're more likely to be engaged, looking at what the professor's doing, writing things down. It's also a great training in terms of professionalism. Most of my professional meetings at Ferris, everybody's got their camera on. Not everybody. Sometimes they don't. That's okay. Usually they do BRB or something like that in chat. But generally everybody's there. It's so much nicer being, I got a couple degrees in communication. We gain a lot of information from nonverbals. So how people react to things that way. It's really valuable to do that. So again, you're engaging more your senses, and I would say, yes, it's easier, and yes, you can kind of be lazy and shut it off. Try not if you can. That's definitely something that's good. And lastly, because, man, this is hard work, right? Motivation and accountability. College is hard. It just is, and especially during pandemic. I don't think I have it here, but make sure the counseling office is fantastic. They're great in terms of maintenance. I know they've definitely helped a lot of my students, and especially during these times where anxiety, depression are just higher. It's just tough. So first, and I would say this one, planning your time, woo. My colleague, advisor, advises mostly pre-pharmacy students, but my friend Emily says, create a schedule for yourself just like if you were taking a class in person. So if the class is Tuesday, Thursdays from 2 to 4, gonna work on the class. Even if it only meets, maybe it doesn't meet it all online, maybe it just the work is online. Well, I'm gonna schedule out that time to work on it. Or maybe they do meet Tuesday on Zoom, but Thursday we don't. Go ahead and schedule that in. And that does take work and it does take planning, but boy, however you choose to do planning, and honestly, as me as an advisor, having worked with thousands of students at this point, I can tell you with certainty, the number one reason why somebody would fail a class if they keep doing it, get dismissed from Ferris, is they don't plan. They don't have a planner. They don't consistently plan out their time. Did you need a planner in high school? Probably not. Most students don't, but your schedule is so much different in college, and especially when it's online. Oh, there's so much stuff that you have to keep track of. So that is one thing, no matter how you do it, be willing, and you can bug your advisor about this, be willing to keep changing how you do it. Some use a phone, some use the written planner. I think most like that. Some have a little whiteboard, a little calendar there, but some way of planning is something you have to do, especially in online learning. I know that Canvas does have the little calendars. Some professors use it and some don't. But again, I would go back to when you transfer that, one of my really good students from last semester said, it was hard to kind of fight the battle because he's like, this took time to fill out my planner at the beginning of the week. but it was worth it because he had to mentally process and see when things were coming up, how long he had time he had to do certain things, and it allowed him to prioritize. Even the professional world, I'll do the same thing. I'll put things in my calendar and I'll put reminders at a certain time so I can see how long lead time do I have? How is my schedule balanced? Am I doing this at the right time? Oops, I can't do that. I've got a couple things coming up here. Gotta plan in some way. And again, bug your advisor if you're really struggling with getting into the habit of this. Make it convenient, whatever it is, I would also say. So whiteboard is great. And also know when you erase that big task or scribble it out, that is the best feeling ever. And there's some psychology behind that. It's true. Psychological reward. So planning your time is huge. My former student and good friend Amanda, she is a physical therapist and awesome. She said checking the online sites, so Canvas, multiple times a day for updates on assignments and deadlines. And I also like she's saying, if you're not sure, email the professor sooner than later. Absolutely. And I like that too, because honestly, a lot of assignments, if you started earlier, your brain has time to start thinking about how you're going to approach it, even if it doesn't seem that way, it does. And as Amanda's saying, and this is so true, every student I've talked to, if they are struggling online, it is that. Treating it as an in-person class as much as possible, because otherwise, now everybody procrastinates, don't get me wrong, but when it's chronic and when it's causing like low grades and just not getting stuff done, yeah, then it becomes problematic. And she's totally right. Just saying, if you don't treat it like an in-person thing, you're going to procrastinate way too much, which she is right. The other thing I would say, as you're kind of plopping things in, it doesn't all have to be drudgery. So if this was my schedule here, I would have lunch, then maybe my psych class on Zoom, and then maybe I'd plop in some study time. By the way, I wouldn't do 2 hours of one subject. That would be a heck of a lot. Have a stack, I would say. And if you're starting a paper and you're like, yeah, I got the main points down, I'm not in a writing mood anymore, fine. Move to the next assignment, move to something else. But you've got a stack of something there. Get up and take a break. Nick, my former student, said he would love to do that. It's good to get the blood flowing. Again, your brain uses blood. It's good to get up and walk once in a while. That definitely helps. But, so it's varied in that 2 hours. You're doing different subjects. You're doing a lot of stuff. But then maybe at 4, I get to do some gaming. Cool. It's easier to be motivated if you know that reward is coming. And I just put gaming there, but it could be whatever hobby. Maybe you're hanging out with friends. Pretty much anything works as a reward, except as my dietitian sister said, she said, not food. Can't do that. You're getting some weird relationships with food. Don't reward yourself with that. Now, if it's dinner with friends, distance, yes, perfect. Because then that's more of the social aspect. But she said, yeah, don't do that. But a lot of other things work as rewards. Otherwise, it kind of feels like drudgery. But if you know, I'm working till 4 and then I get to go do this fun thing, you're going to be more motivated to kind of stick with it and make it work. Okay, study buddies or groups. Indeed, my friend Amy, I work with her at a children's bereavement camp almost every summer. She's a cool person. She teaches 3rd grade, and I can tell she's an awesome teacher just based on her discussions. But anyway, she says groups, putting all the great minds together, hatching our thoughts, always something I missed or understanding that somebody else caught. Absolutely. If any of you have been to graduate school, this is pretty much every class that you definitely do this, but it's also good to do in undergrad, right? You have somebody that shares a class with you, definitely reach out. Now, if you're on campus, you can certainly do that with masks and kind of distancing. Absolutely. We got plenty of places to do that on campus, library or the UC, great. Now, if you're off campus, though, that does make it a little bit more difficult, but still possible. I show a generic picture of a student working there, and then the great state of Texas. My student from last semester, she goes by the nickname Hannah Bear, and she said I could use this. So Hannah Bear said that she's from Texas, and so when she was here studying at Ferris, a lot of her family and friends were back home. And so her friends that were also in college, also studying things, she would schedule Zoom study times with them, which is great. So I told her, I said, I love this because it's an accountability partner, very much like in graduate school when my friend Justin was my workout partner. Like if my butt's not there at 8 a.m., I'm being a jerk because Justin's waiting for me. He needs somebody to spot him. Same idea when it comes to studying, right? If somebody's sitting there waiting on Zoom, so you say, hey, friend who also wants to study, you get that social time with them. If you decide that you need to kind of catch up first for like a few minutes, that's cool. but no, you gotta, you gotta study at some point, or maybe that's the reward at the end. You kind of catch each other up on your day at the end of the Zoom call, who knows? But that worked really well. And Hannah said she would, not only they would do like snacks, but she said also it allowed her an opportunity to teach her friend what she was learning. So again, you can do all sorts of like really cool accountability partner stuff, but you can also get that social connection going, even at a distance, which is really cool because she's, her friends are across the country basically. But that's fantastic. Study buddies are great. Environment. Now, former student Paul, I believe he works at Chrysler, I believe, good guy. And he said, hey, if I can study outside of where I lived, like library or Starbucks, that was great. He said there's a lot less distractions. True. I would agree with that. If I can, I like it because my bed's right over there. Snacks are right over there. If I go somewhere else, and also I like it if other people are kind of doing similar things, doesn't feel like drudgery, right? Other people are studying, other people are doing those types of things. And so he might suggest like the library room like this, perhaps. So if you're on campus, there are plenty of really big, well-ventilated rooms where you can distance and do that type of thing. That's totally fine. Now, if, however, so a lot of you might be studying at home. Hey, that's true. And as we can see this kind of generic picture here, the student's got a pretty decent setup. She's at a table and she's got her laptop. She's got her headphones, which is kind of cool. So she can probably tune out whatever chaos is going around behind her. But I see her mom in the background there. No offense to the mom, but maybe she's got other stuff going on. Maybe she needs to get dinner ready. She's talking with somebody. Maybe your dad wanders in. Maybe dad's getting, who knows? It's a little bit harder, right? If you're at home trying to find that environment, a lot of times for my students, they're like, my room is about the only non-distracting place. What I would say, try to be as creative as you can. Try to find as non-distracting environment as you possibly can. I know sometimes students would say, yep, I sure do study in bed. As you can see, I'm trying to hint at with the picture here. Maybe not ideal. Can you do it? You sure can. You can. What we would basically say, as kind of demonstrated by the picture, it's just that much more likely that you will skip class or skip your study session or take a nap or do whatever, because that's usually what we do in beds, right? And the research on this is pretty clear, and funny enough, it comes from a area, there's a million different areas of psychology, but one of which is environmental. And that's literally what they're talking about. And basically what they would say, you associate the bed with sleeping, not work. And when you start mixing up those associations, you're probably not going to do either one of them well. So I would say, if at all possible, if you are struggling with sleep, that's the first thing I would change. If you are struggling with, not being too super productive, again, that's another thing I would change. Now, you're saying, Dave, again, I don't have a table. I'm not made of money. There's only so many things I can do. Again, try to be as creative as possible. Here's some tips that I found, which are pretty cool online. Check that out. That is somebody's dresser. And they basically put a stack of books and they put their laptop up there. They actually, in this case, have a separate keyboard. Looks like they put a piece of 1x6 wood on the dresser, and they have their little desk. Cool. They just made themselves a standing desk. Not bad. Possible. I would say if you're going to stand all day, try to get a cushion. Yes, I'm a nerd and I've looked that up. Yes, you probably should. If you're going to stand for extended periods and move around. But that's a great idea, something like that. This person used some milk crates. Great. That works. They do have a little table at this point, but they kind of converted it into that into books into kind of a standing deal there. But that's not bad. That's being pretty creative. So think of that. Like I say, even if it's just getting away from your bed in some fashion, try and bug your caregivers, right? Maybe they can think of some way to be creative where you can have a non-distracting space that's not your bed, ideally, because environment does matter, right? All right, and the resources at FSU, last but not least, my friend Kathy, who does a lot of photography, has a lot of, but she helped me out at the bereavement camp as well. She's got all sorts of cool experiences, smart person. She said, ask the professor. A lot of times we don't do that, but you can, especially I would tell my advisees, if you struggled after the first test, tell them what you've been doing. Say, what would you suggest? That's great because they've worked with thousands of students before. They've handed out the grades. They've seen what works and what does not. They're not going to give you the answers to the test probably, but they will give you some tips. Not bad. A lot of times we forget about that. And I think of my friend, Dr. Gray, Dr. John Gray, who teaches philosophy here, a good friend of mine. He loves, especially him, he loves when students meet with him. saying, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm doing well with, here's what I'm struggling with, what can you, he loves that because he likes to get to know his students. Vast majority of profs, they love this. You know, they want to help you. They want to make sure that you do well. All of them want that. So yeah, make sure to do that. My friend Ashley there in front of the Educational Counseling and Disability Services office, ecds@ferris.edu if you wanted to email them, but you could also stop by the first floor of the Arts and Sciences complex there. If you're struggling, obviously the presentation today is a lot of good tips that will help you, but if it's a lot deeper than that, you can go visit one of the educational counselors there. One, they're licensed counselors, which is cool, but their main focus is helping you to be a better student. So if it's mostly time management or mostly planning or mostly just study skills, maybe it's test anxiety or something like that, I feel like every time I've referred a student there, they come off better in terms of being a better learner and being able to succeed in college better. You've just got a really good expert that's helping you learn better. So definitely utilize that resource for sure. My friend Karen, she's there, and this is pre-mask days, so don't like mask shame her or anything. But anyway, I was taking a picture in front of the Academic Literacy Center. Karen Royster James runs that. She's a wonderful, smart lady who helps me and my students and all sorts of people. That's at the back of the library. So if you're on campus, yes, they do offer on-campus tutoring now. So you can go there and they'll monitor it in terms of if they have too many people, they'll limit it, but you can generally walk in and do those appointments. You can also go on the website and sign up for Tutor Track. That's in my FSU as well. So you can get some online tutoring as well. With me, I tell my advisees, I had a really good GPA. I had a 3.7, I mean, I'm humble, 3.7 undergrad GPA. So that's good. I did a lot of tutoring for math. Tons of tutoring for math. That subject just did not come naturally to me. I needed somebody else to explain it so that I understood it. That was a really difficult subject for me. So even students who achieve, we need tutoring, right? Somebody else to explain it and somebody else to get some assistance. A lot of times these are student helpers too, who are really cool, relatable people who are like, yeah, I struggled with this too. Here's another way to think about it. It's great. So many students have benefited from the tutoring center if you just need a little bit of extra help. Or I put my smiley face over me because I might not look like your advisor. Your advisor. You can go into my FSU if you go to student and you go to the registration information, my registration. Over in the lower left, you'll see advisor status and registration info. You'll find out who your advisor is. We all are pretty much offering online meetings or phone meetings. Talk to us about it. We may not be able to get to the depth, like if it's test anxiety, we're really not equipped to deal with that, but we can usually identify it, and then we can refer you to one of our educational counselor friends. Or again, we can help you plan a little bit. I've worked with students to figure out ways in which they could restructure their week or whatever. I mean, your advisor, we're really here, passionate to help you learn. So all the things I think that I've covered will help as you're learning online and trying to succeed. Again, as I pointed out, in your work world and kind of personal life and your college life, this is all really important. So when this gets posted online, I'll try to include some links at the bottom just to make sure you can get connected easily with tutoring or find out who your advisor is or take advantage of any of these things. But I hope that you've all found it valuable and have a really good semester.